Welcome to the Israel Insider Weekly Podcast, where we talk about the news in Israel with Ron Cantor, president of Shalanu TV and Israel Regional Director for God TV. I'm Lisa Hutchison. Thanks for joining us today. Well, Ron, let's just get right into it. It's something I think that's on the mind of many Israelis. There's an uptick in COVID, in coronavirus. So why don't you share with our listeners what's happening?
Yeah, so it's not unexpected. On June 15th, really the beginning of June, they got rid of most of the mandates, ordinances regarding people protecting themselves. On June 15th, they got rid of all the remaining ones. The mask mandate inside public places was done away with. So if anything, I'm not a doctor and I don't want to pretend to be one, but I'm also not stupid, and I can see that 1 + 1 = 2. So we had gotten down to roughly sometimes below 6 cases a day. I think we were at 0 a couple days, new cases.
Yeah.
And then we took the masks off, and then within a few days we saw an uptick. Now, because 80% plus of the adult population is vaccinated, I would assume that's the reason it has not been a massive uptake. When we did this a year ago, coming out of May 2020, it went through the roof, and then we had to go into another shutdown during the summer to try and bring it back down. We brought it down. I think, the goal is to get it to under 1,000 cases a day. And then in January, it skyrocketed to 12,000 a day on January 27th. So this is all without the vaccine. So now with 80% plus of the population of Israel vaccinated, and no major, at this point, time will only tell. But so far, there's been no major consistent side effects to the vaccine. You can find some isolated cases where people have suffered some sort of difficulty. But for the most part, the entire adult population is vaccinated and moving on with life. So when we took the mask off on June 15, we saw within a few days an immediate uptick. Now we're recording on the 26th. So it's 11 days out. And I think there's just under 1,000 cases in the entire country. Again, if we had done this when we did this a year ago, it would have been thousands of cases. The primary people that are being infected are children who are not vaccinated. And there's concern that there's this new variant, they're calling the Delta variant from India, that apparently children are more susceptible. I always have a hard time with that word.
Susceptible.
Easier.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You say it.
Susceptible.
Oh, it's so easy. More susceptible. And so of the few hundred, I think right now we saw 200 in the last couple of days. Of all these, I know of 3 that were vaccinated. Now, the vaccine was never meant to eliminate all coronavirus. I think they said 95%. The Pfizer vaccine, that's what we have here in Israel, had a 95% success rate. Well, that means a 5% failure rate. Now, the hope was that the more vaccinated people you have, the less infections and the less infected people, then that 95%, it goes up and up and up until, we were down to 0 cases a day, during certain days. But again, now we've taken and so again, anyone who says masks don't work. Now, first of all, like I said, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, but I do know this, that the minute we took the mask off, the cases started going up. Now, personally, I don't think it's a reason to panic. People get sick all the time, and we don't, we don't shut down countries. This thing, God willing, seems under control. As they said in one of the quotes I read, we need to control coronavirus and not let coronavirus control us.
Yeah.
So the very fact that we have a few 100 cases out of almost 10 million people is nothing to be alarmed about. But the coronavirus cabinet will meet tomorrow. Sunday is the first day of the week here in Israel. And they're not planning to come out with new severe restrictions, though I think they will encourage mask wearing in public places and certainly in large indoor gathering. So
Mm-hmm.
now, what does this mean for those? Most of our listeners are outside of Israel. It means that they're delaying opening up the country to foreign isolate. When I say isolated, I mean not part of a tour,
Mm-hmm.
single travelers for another month. So I have friends that were planning on coming in July. They now have to push their travel plans back to August, and we'll have to see what happens. But I think this was expected to some degree. Everyone taking off their
Mm-hmm.
mask, and again, because most of the countries vaccinated, it's relatively low.
Mm-hmm. And it seems too that maybe another factor in there was in the entrance when they were, as the borders have been opened and the airport has seen more traffic, there were several times when the lines were so long that
Right.
they had to just let people on in. And so there's kind of, just a little bit of the mechanics of it all that the government is trying to still sort out in order that people can go ahead and quarantine if they need to and not possibly, spread anything. And then also,
Right.
anyway, so it seems like the government there is working those details out. They're working to make sure when folks come in the airport that there is that screening and just precautions like that, which is
Well,
good. I think that will allow it to open back up
I
hopefully
got
over there
back on
soon.
May 10th.
Mhm.
And I can tell you that it was organized and yet not organized.
Mhm.
Basically, you went through the airport, and this is the second time I've gone through the airport since coronavirus. The first time was in September or early October, and it was very different this time. You actually go through the entire process without any real restriction. A far cry from the horror stories I was hearing of
Mhm.
people being put into lines like the Holocaust, which was an absurd, even sick comparison.
Mm.
Uh, but there were no. Basically, you went right through the airport. Now, when you got out of the airport, you don't go. You wouldn't go outside. When you got
Mhm.
in the main hall, instead of going outside to a taxi cab or your car, you would go into this massive new building, like a tent. And it was
Mm.
massive. And inside
Mhm.
of there, everybody would download an app onto their phone, and that app would enable them to be in touch with you. Everybody would be tested, and then you would go on your way. Now, and so that part was organized.
Mhm.
What was not organized is I didn't know if I was expected to quarantine or not. And I kept
Ah.
asking different people, and I couldn't get a clear answer. And finally, I said, "No,
Mhm.
no. If you got tested, we'll let you know if there's a problem." So I left, and I went, and nobody ever checked on me. Nobody ever called me. And there was, people were screaming bloody murder about people needing to wear a bracelet like you would put on your ankle, although they'd put it
Mhm.
on your hand so they'd know that you're not leaving your home. Nobody that was not happening. That was scrapped before I got home.
Mhm.
And when I got 2 weeks, I forgot about it. I completely forgot about it. And I got an email 2 weeks after I arrived saying that I was now free to leave my house. Now, again, I'm trying to be a good citizen and obey the rules. It was just super unclear.
Mhm.
And so that was when we were limitedly opened up. So since then, we opened up more and more and more. So I can only imagine that it became much more difficult to test everybody
Mhm.
coming in and give clear instructions. And Israel is famous for its bureaucracy. And, there's certain areas that we're so good at. Like if you see our road system, I remember when I moved here, we have today some of the most amazing roads in the world. It gets
Mhm.
better every year. And even during coronavirus, they kept working. We just have a great road system. And sometimes I can't believe that we can be so clumsy in other parts of our government, and yet our road system is just unbelievable.
Yeah. And technology, it's like there's parts of the government where it seems like technology, like the app, download this app and then all that,
Right.
but then there's always the human factor. So
Yes,
anyway,
those
everyone
pesky
just,
humans. If only we
yeah,
could. No, no, we need humans.
we need humans. Thank the Lord for us, and he knows what he's doing. But yeah, so everyone just stay tuned. We'll be sure to keep you updated and updated too on the possible tour with Ron and Ilana that they're maybe looking at, for the fall. We just have to obviously see, how it goes. It seems to be week to week, day to day, month to
Hmm.
month still. So stay
Yeah,
tuned.
and I'll say this, that we at this point we can't in good conscience, start to put together a tour. We did that. I got a hold of my partner here in Israel, and he put together a great tour for us for the fall. But I can just see I don't want people making plans, spending
Mm-hmm.
money, getting airplane tickets, and then we have to cancel the tour. It's a
Yeah.
headache for people, and I don't want to do
Yeah.
that. I don't want to get their hopes up. So we're gonna wait until we know that Israel is open, and then we're gonna do our next tour.
Yeah, that makes sense. So everyone will just keep you updated. Um, okay, the next thing that I think was very interesting this week in the news is, especially in light of the recent war with Hamas and all the rockets that were fired in, Israel has a new weapon. And it's a laser in the sky. So, do you maybe want to share a little bit with us about that? They had a recent test of this laser.
Yes. It's pretty amazing. I've seen some video of it, and basically, right now the Iron Dome, it is really awesome, and everyone saw those incredible pictures of its effectiveness when dozens of rockets were shot at the same time and it was an attempt to
Mm-hmm.
overwhelm the Iron Dome system.
Mm-hmm.
And these rockets cost Hamas $300 to $800 a piece to make, pocket change.
Mm-hmm.
The I'm reading, here that the Iron Dome missiles cost, that when a barrage is sent up, it's 50,000 to 150,000. I remember when it was $50,000 a piece for
Wow.
each Iron Dome missile was a $50,000
Wow.
burden on the Israeli taxpayer.
Wow.
And of course, the U.S. helps with it. And one of the things that happens, Lisa, I don't want to say it's a blessing, the Hamas rockets, but they do cause, I don't want to say they cause minimal damage. They cause minimal damage compared to what they would cause without the Iron Dome. Without the
Mhm.
Iron Dome, there'd be no more Gaza, or we say
Mhm.
Gaza in Hebrew, and in English it's Gaza. There'd be no more Gaza because we would have to
Mhm.
respond aggressively. Right now, we respond with kit gloves, just
Mhm.
laser type, pinpoint responses. But and I think the last thing, I think Hamas loves the Iron Dome because it makes them look like bold heroes willing to shoot Israel with dozens of rockets, and there's minimal damage. Of course, we were in Ashkelon. I saw homes that were destroyed, and school classrooms that took a direct hit. Thank God there were no
Mm.
students in there. I mean, we've seen the destruction and the trauma that it causes in Israel's citizens, particularly our children. So I
Mhm.
don't want to pretend like it doesn't have an impact, but what it has done is it pushes us to, we're called the startup nation, and the
Mhm.
startup nation is the idea that we invent stuff, we get things done, we start businesses, we and the one of the reasons that we have to do this is because we're constantly under threat.
Mhm.
That has pushed us. What Shimon Peres, former prime minister, former president of Israel, he said that the fact that Israel doesn't have oil is the biggest blessing. I never saw this until I read his book. It was a revelation. Um, no Time for Small Dreams, an amazing book. And he said, if we were blessed with oil, we would have been lazy. But
Hmm.
because we have no natural resources, technologies become our natural resources,
Hmm.
and it's the reason. I don't want to say it's one of the reasons. It's the reasons the Arab nations are making peace with us. Morocco, UAE, Bahrain, and other nations, Sudan, they're making peace with Israel because they want our technology. They need it,
Mhm.
and so. That is a result of being surrounded by enemies for over 70 years. And so you come up with things like the Iron Dome. Well, now we've come up with a laser system that is going to add a new, well, let me just quote Benny Gantz. The laser system he's our defense minister, will add a new layer of protection at greater ranges in facing a variety of threats, including securing the state of Israel while saving cost of interception. The laser will be much less expensive than the $50,000 to
Mhm.
$150,000 that we spend each time we're attacked by rockets, and it's incredibly effective. You just see this. In the article we wrote, we talked about them coming out of the sky,
Mhm.
from an airplane, but they'll be coming out of the ground, and it's just like it's just something you've seen in a movie with this spinning
Yes,
head, like it's and it detects the target very quickly,
that's
and
awesome.
instead of having to use a missile, it uses a laser, which is far cheaper, and it knocks the bomb out of the sky.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Very Star Wars. And it's also one thing that I was really impressed with about it was that it will reach the missiles closer to their origination point, meaning like they'll
right.
be able to stop it before it gets near population centers. And that is another huge plus. I marvel, just like what you were saying, I marvel at how, because Israel has been in such it is in a defensive posture. I mean, you guys are just always in a place of having to defend yourself. And so you have to get better and better because the amount of land you have to defend is very small, and the
Right.
territory, that you have to work from, it's just a whole different scenario than what we might imagine from here in the United States. And it's just awesome that God has given such gifts, to be able to make those technology leaps. And then I was thinking too, when you were talking about how the Arab nations, like I think we wrote about last week, a technology making water out of air. And there's a company that has really developed this heat extraction technology, and they're sharing it with the folks in UAE, and making friends from former enemies. And it's really amazing how how Israel is
Yeah, a
blessed with
good a
that.
good part of our
And
water today, in some cities, it's over 70%. The water comes from the sea,
wow.
not the Sea of Galilee, which is fresh
Mm-hmm.
water, but from the Mediterranean or the Red
Wow.
Sea, and we have these desalination factories that
Mm-hmm.
take salt water and turn it into fresh water.
Wow, that's
So
so
that
amazing.
technology in the Middle East is very important.
Yeah, water.
Jordan is constantly in a drought, and we
Yeah,
provide them much of their water. And so, these are incredibly, these are breakthrough technologies that can
yeah.
save lives.
Water's more valuable than oil.
Yeah.
um so with that, there is still for sure one very large enemy that looms out
Yes.
there for Israel. And that's another story that was in the news this week. Iran held elections, which I honestly probably use that word loosely.
Right.
Elections, held
Elections in
elections.
quotes.
Yeah, air quotes with that one.
Yeah.
And so they have a new president, and I'll just say this: he is nicknamed the Hangman of Tehran. So,
Yes.
would you like to tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. Ibrahim Razi, I think is how they pronounce his last name.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as you said, the notorious hangman of Tehran. He's become the new president in Iran, and he is a hardliner. Let me just share what Dr. Tamar Gidin, she's an expert and a researcher in Haifa University. She said the executioner is now the head of the executive branch. See what she did there? He's
Mm-hmm.
a man with the blood of thousands of Iranians on his
Yeah.
hands.
Mm.
He was a member of the death committees in the 80s, and he sentenced thousands of people to death. And let me just say this: when murder is addictive behavior, just
Mm.
like sexual perversion, drug abuse, there is a spiritual, this is my belief, there's a
Mm.
spiritual transaction that takes place when you become a multi murderer, a
Mm.
serial killer. He's obsessed with killing. It's an addiction to him. Often, as a serial killer, after he kills, will feel remorse. And I'm not talking about a sociopath, but some of them who can feel remorse will, until the urge becomes too great and they kill again.
Mm.
I remember years ago watching the movie Lawrence of Arabia, and he's just kind of a British uh, officer in Jordan, and he doesn't seem very sharp. And then he kind of leads this rebellion, and there's a scene where he is killing. I mean, it's just mass hand to hand combat, and he almost becomes a different man at this point because
Hmm.
he tastes blood. There's
Mm.
something that happens to a person when you kill somebody in cold blood. I
Mm.
don't mean in the midst of war, and maybe God gives grace for that, but when you become a terrorist, when
Mhm.
you began, just like in Germany during World War II, you have, it's simple German farmers who, suddenly become Nazis.
Mhm.
And then it's nothing to kill somebody. It's just no big deal. In fact, you begin to enjoy it. It's demonic. And so
Mhm.
now you have someone like that is the head of Iran. Now we know the head of Iran is the Ayatollah. It is the heart, the radical Islamic fascist, as I call
Mm.
them. Uh,
Mhm.
and now they've got an ally, a real ally in the executive branch. Um, so it's something to be concerned about. Naftali Bennett, he said that Razi's election is, I would say, the last chance for the world power to wake up before returning to the nuclear agreement and to understand who they are doing business with.
Mhm.
To be clear, he's advocating not, like, before you return to this
Mhm.
ridiculous agreement, understand that now you're not dealing with just your average lunatic. You're dealing with a mass murder. And he went on to say these guys are murderers, mass murderers, a regime of brutal hangmen, and they must never be allowed to have weapons of mass destructions that will enable it to kill thousands, not thousands, sorry, but millions, Bennett
Mm.
warned. So I'm concerned about this. I'm concerned that, I really pray for President Biden that he will
Mhm.
understand that you cannot make peace with people who by their very nature want to kill you.
Mhm.
There's a story that I learned here when I was studying Hebrew. We had to read all these different stories in Hebrew to go in Hebrew, and it's the story of the frog and the scorpion. And the frog is getting ready to go across the creek, and the scorpion says, "Hey, would you mind if I get on your back, get a ride over with you?" And the frog says, "Of course I mind. You're a scorpion. Come on, you're gonna you're gonna bite me or what do they do?
Sting
Scorpion
is
sting.
sting.
It's
Yeah.
the word I'm looking for. That and susceptible. You're gonna sting me, and he says I'm susceptible to your sting, and he says no. I know I'm a scorpion. I know usually I do that, but really I just need to get to the other side. And it's just too much water. I cannot do it, and they go back and forth, and the frog's just like I can't risk it, but the scorpion doesn't give up, and he finally convinces the frog, and the frog takes him over the creek to the other side. And just as they get to the other side, the scorpion stings him. And
Mm.
as the frog is dying, he says, "But you gave me your word, you promised." And the scorpion's like, I know, but I'm a scorpion. In other words, this is my nature. Despite
Mhm.
everything I said, you understand, at the end of the day, I sting people. That's what I do. And at the
Mhm.
end of the day, Iran is an Islamic fundamentalist regime that wants world domination. They have very little interest in peace. They have a religious eschatological
Mhm.
agenda based on Islam, which is to take over the world, that the world would submit to them. And that is who runs their government. So this is not good news for anyone that this guy is now the president.
Yeah. And for sure it seems that Prime Minister Bennett and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid are both warning and saying,
Yep.
again, making that stand that, even if no one else in the world uh, takes notice, Israel knows what's happening, and Israel will take care of itself.
Yep.
I mean, you have to defend yourself, especially when another nation is saying, they're out for your complete destruction.
Yeah.
And they're, potentially on the verge of getting nuclear weapons. And
Right. So I expect the rhetoric to step up. If you'll remember when
mhm.
Ahmadinejad was
Yeah, I
was
was just thinking
president,
about that.
it
Mhm.
was death to Israel,
That
death to the
that
U.S.
yep, he was
We need to wipe
constant.
Israel off the map. Stuff like that. Fun
He was
stuff.
relentless. Yeah. Yeah, so it'll be something to pray about and to watch. And I think too, just for me personally, and maybe to encourage everyone else, to also remember though to pray for the people of Iran,
Yeah.
because clearly, I mean, I saw even in when I was reading different articles that, I mean, there were some brave mothers, it seemed like older mothers who were standing up against the election and saying, going online and saying, please, dear Iranians, you know, don't don't participate in this election. It's a sham, and all we've done for the last 40 years is vote in people who have killed our children. And so there are people in Iran who don't agree with this government. However, just similar to the people in Gaza who are in the grips of Hamas and the wickedness and demonic ways of that group, it's the same in Iran. And
Right.
God, like you say all the time, we love the Arabs, and God loves these people, and He is desiring for them to be free and to know
Yes.
His Son, Jesus. And so, anyway, just that's my prayer about it, and praying, of course, for the safety of Israel. But I know that Yahweh is always watching out for Israel, and that is a great comfort.
Amen. I'm not worried.
Yeah, that's awesome. One last thing for our listeners, I thought it might be good if we could just get a little update. The new government
Yes.
seems to be holding. That's pretty amazing to me. They made it
Yeah.
through with the wheelbarrow, and it's still going. So what's it looking like there?
Yeah, it is. It's so far it's a stable government. Like I said from the very beginning, I expected it to last, even though it is a laser thin majority, because everybody knows what's at risk
Mm-hmm.
if it fails. New elections. And
Mm-hmm.
Israelis just don't want to go through another election. We are on the verge of passing a state budget for the first time in 3 years. And when you don't have a budget, you're just spending money. There's some emergency things that go into place,
Mm-hmm.
so people don't starve. But there are other things you can't do anything new,
Mm-hmm.
and people who are really in need, like Holocaust survivors, we can't identify areas where we need to take care of them and fund that when you don't have a budget. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're on the verge of finally passing a budget. By the way, they have 100 days from the time the government starts to pass a budget. And the
Ah.
reason the last government fell, by the way, was because Netanyahu and Benny Gantz could not pass a budget. Gantz wanted a 2-year budget. Netanyahu wanted a 1-year budget, and for good reason. He knew if he had a 1-year budget, then he could wait till right before the handover date, which would have been in November, where Gantz would have been the prime minister instead of him, and he could have collapsed the government.
Mm.
Whereas Gantz wanted a 2-year budget because that would have there were certain guarantees that would have gone into place that Netanyahu would have had to stay in the government while Gantz was prime minister, which nobody expected him to do. And he didn't, because he wouldn't sign a 2-year budget. So they could never, and Gantz knew he had to stand on that issue. So it fell because they could not create a budget or pass a budget in the declared time limit. So now this government has to do it, and it is expected that they will do it, that it will pass. And these are just minor things, but they're important for a government. This is one of the reasons why the Change Bloc said we need this government just to dot some I's and cross some T's for the average Israelis, to get some things passed,
Yeah.
and to fund different initiatives. So they seem to be doing that. And one of the things that I've been impressed about, I said this last time, people don't really look at this as Bennett's government. There's been a lot of criticism of Bennett, how dare him, become prime minister with only 6 seats in his party. Well, I mean, by the way, that Bibi was promising the same thing. On the one hand, Netanyahu was saying, hey, Bennett, I'll let you be prime minister if you'll come and be with me. And then when he went with Lapid, oh, how dare him? He's only got 6 seats. That's well, you were promising him the same thing. So, but he was just in a position where he could do that. That's what you do in politics. It's the art of what you can do. And he knew that in order for his people to be willing to go into the government, they had to get something back that was very big, which was allowing for there to be a right-wing prime minister. But he's a sensible right-wing prime minister, knowing that he is in a government with other right-wing parties, center parties, and a few left-wing parties, and that they're going to have that nobody's getting everything they want. But what has impressed me, and this is what I started to say, is you don't really look at it as the Bennett government. It reminds me a lot lot of ministry. The way we do ministry in Tikkun is we do almost everything as a team. Um, we have Asher Intrader, Dan Juster, Eitan Tishkov, myself, Ariel Blumenthal, Yuval Yanai. Over here in Israel, we have a team of leaders, and we don't ever really think of it as Tikkun is not the ministry of Asher. It's not I was the CEO for a while. It was never my ministry. I never looked at. I was there to serve as the CEO to help my brothers, at least in media, reach further. And I love being in team ministry. That's where I'll be in team ministry as long as I'm on earth. I do not believe in I call it the my ministry syndrome. And I see that in this government. I've never seen anything like it, where these guys seem to genuinely like each other and want to do good for the people of Israel. I've been particularly impressed with Yair Lapid. He is taking his position as the foreign minister very seriously. He's been very active in communicating with world leaders, with other foreign ministers. He's going to the UAE very soon. So I am optimistic, and I think many Israelis are for this government, and I don't think they're going to fall easy, as many have wished. By the way, before we close today's program, I want to say one more thing, Lisa.
Okay.
Elon and I, we went to Akko, which is a northern city, a couple days ago. We went there overnight because in the morning I was going to be speaking to a group called, let's see if I can remember their name. It is Holocaust survivors led by a precious survivor by the name of Gita Koifman. And it is the survivors from the ghettos and the concentration camps. And it's I believe it's the largest organization of survivors in the country. We've been working with them through other partners for years, but it was the first time I got to meet her. And now we're going to work directly with them to help the survivors. But they invited me to come and share there. Now, it's funny, God never wastes anything. So we stayed the night in Akko. Now, what is Akko? Akko is an interesting city. It has an ancient old city, just like Jerusalem, with walls. It's beautiful. It's right on the Mediterranean Sea, but it is a integrated city of Jews and Arabs. And during the last war, we saw something in Akko we've never seen, and that was attacks between Jews and Arabs.
Wow.
Vicious, maybe even deadly. I can't remember. I mean, it was just such a crazy time, but I believe someone may have been killed. And it was just really tragic. So there was a rise in what I would call the far right wing of the Arab community and the far right wing of the Jewish community. In Hebrew we have two words, leumiyut and patriotiyut. You might hear the word patriot in one of those. So, part of my message to them was, leumiyut is nationalism. And then you have patriotiyut, which is patriotism. Patriotism is good. It's when you love your country. You're proud to be of your country, in the good sense of the word proud. But nationalism is when, it's what we saw in the Third Reich, where you think that your country is the best in the world and you have to rule over others. And it tends to lead to racism, such as we saw in the Nazis, which led to the Holocaust. Now, when we were in Akko, it was interesting because if you went to the old city of Akko a year ago, it's full of Jewish tourists. They go there, they eat the hummus, they eat the traditional Arab meals and foods, and it's just great, and everybody gets along. Never were any concern. Ilana and I were there, and there were no Jews in the old city.
Wow.
And they rely on that for the economy. But people, Israeli Jews, are scared. They're scared to go back. Now, maybe we're too dumb. I don't know. We just walked around. We didn't have a care in the world, but we interacted with a bunch of Arabs in Akko, and they, one of the things that we always try and do when we interact with Arabs is to make sure they understand that as Jewish Israelis, we do not hate them because they're Arab. You judge somebody, as Dr. King said, based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin or their race. And so we try and live by that. And so we love to shine the light of Yeshua. And everybody was so sweet to us. When we ate in a restaurant, I mean, they just spoiled us. They wanted us to know that as Israeli Arabs, they don't hate us because we are Israeli Jews. And it was really special and yet sad at the same time because
Mm-hmm.
and when we went back to the apartment, a a Muslim woman jumped in the elevator right as we were getting ready. The doors were closing, and we're going up. And I said to her in Hebrew, it's something about Jews and Arabs getting along, loving each other, da da da. And when I said that to her, it kind of shocked her. And she opened up and she smiled. And then she said to us, I'm on the 12th floor. Will you and your wife come to my apartment? I want you to see, I have a beautiful view of the old city. So we went in there. I mean, just seemed really crazy that a Muslim woman would invite us into her apartment, but she did. And she was so happy. And she took Ilana's phone number and they were going to get together the
Aw.
next morning to have coffee. Um, Sometimes we just need to get out of our comfort zone and
Yeah.
express love to people. So when I finally got to share with the survivors, my main message was that we at Shalano, at God TV, Messiah's Mandate, that we're never going to forget them.
Mm-hmm.
That just as we say we'll never forget the Holocaust, as long as they're alive, we're never going to forget them, and we're
Mm-hmm.
going to do what we can to take care of them. But the Holocaust happened because of um, just blind hatred, racism, bigotry, anti-Semitism. And, we still see it in the world today. We see a rise of it in the world today.
Mm-hmm.
But as Jews, our responsibility before God, we're called to be a light to the nations. We're not called. So we've got a very tiny fringe movement in Israel of right wing fanatics. Now, someone said, Ron, you keep saying right wing, right wing. Well, we have left wing fanatics too, but the right wing, nationalism tends to be a right wing movement, where extreme socialism, communism, I would call the crazy left wing. So
Mm-hmm.
there's both. I don't want to be part of either groups. Neither the Bible affirms neither ideologies.
Right.
So my message to them is that as Jews, Am Nivcha, the chosen people. In Hebrew, it's Am Nivcha, the chosen people. And I said, what were we chosen for? We weren't chosen to hate. We weren't chosen, to be racist. We were chosen, and we weren't chosen to tell the world we're the best. We're better than
Mm-hmm.
you.
Mm-hmm.
We were chosen to be a light. We're
Yeah.
chosen to, Psalm 67, the psalmist prays that God's light would shine on us, Israel. Why? So that the world would see that light and come to his salvation. So
Yeah.
we have to constantly fight against. And then I shared this message yesterday in our congregation, Tiferet Yeshua. Asher could not make it. He was supposed to teach and asked me at the last second. And I hate to preach in Hebrew without any preparation, but the Lord gave me grace. We had a great time. But I told our congregation, which is 100% Jewish, we were chosen to love. We were chosen to be a light. And no matter what anybody else in our country does, or what they do in Iran, or what they do anywhere else, we have to walk in the love of Yeshua and shine that
Yeah.
light.
Amen. Yeah.
So it was a real honor to, as a Messianic Jew, even to be invited to speak to Holocaust survivors. And when I got down from speaking, it was pretty short, about 5 minutes plus translation. The guy that I was sitting next to, he also spoke briefly. He is some minister over, I can't remember his title. I don't know if he knew I was a believer or not, but he turned to me and he said, Ani maskim itcha b'mea achuzim. He said, I agree with everything you said 100%. So I said,
Mhm.
well, let me just share with you one more thing. So anyways, no, I didn't say that. Maybe another time.
That's
it. I think
awesome.
we're good for today.
Alrighty.
Lisa?
That is a great story. Thank you for ending with that, sharing that with us. And that does wrap it up for this episode of the Israel Insider Podcast. And if you enjoyed this weekly podcast, please be sure to give it a review on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, or wherever you're listening from so other listeners can find the podcast. Be sure to follow the Israel Insider on Facebook and sign up for our daily email to get the inside scoop on happenings in the Holy Land. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next week.